Hello, everyone. We are here. Yes. So we have the last talk from Juan Rocha, that is a research scientist at the Stockholm Resilience Center. And he also was visiting scientists in the Princeton Environment Institute and other interesting places. We'll talk about ecosystem resilience. So please go ahead.
Super. Can everyone see my screen now? Excellent.
Yes.
And if I do full screen, still works.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks, Leonardo and the organizers for this invitation. What I'm going to present today is work in progress. It's not in published, so the purpose of presenting this is, of course, to get feedback from the brilliant minds that are in the room. It's going to be hard to top up with my presentation. The previous one has been a really exciting week. And again, thanks for having me here. What I'm going to present today is some recent work on trying to detect resilience loss in ecosystems. I have prepared for about 30 to 35 minutes talk, and then we can stop for some questions. And if time permits at the end and you still have energy, I know it's Friday night, it's dark here in Europe, I can also present some of my social science work on how people behave when facing situations with thresholds. If you have any problems with the slides because of an internet connection or so, there are a copy on my website, but if hopefully everything works all right. I will be talking about resilience, and I know it's a contested concept that many people use, implying many different things. If I would talk to my mom about resilience, the Oxford Dictionary will do, and that's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or the ability of an object to spring back into shape. However, the journal Nature a couple of years back complained that there is over 70 definitions of resilience, and when scientists use it, it can become tricky. So acknowledging that, I will put up front what I mean by resilience and apologize if it doesn't align with other definitions. But what we use it at the Stockholm Resilience Center is this capacity of any system to absorb disturbance and reorganize while undergoing change, so as still retain essentially the same function, structure, feedbacks, and therefore identity. This definition hasn't changed that much since the original proposal by Holling in '73. But over the years, it has been starting to incorporate other elements that doesn't come from the kind of mathematical understanding of it, but trying to incorporate things like transformations or adaptations that are a little bit harder to model and measure. I would argue that these beautiful concepts were kind of originated the day that mathematicians like Henri Poincaré discovered bifurcation by the 1886. He ran into this type of nonlinear dynamics where systems and their same parameter values can coexist in different equilibria or regimes. This beautiful type of mathematics has found applications in a wide range of fields, ranging from the social sciences with poverty traps, segregation, or the evolution of cooperation, all the way to cancer, language, finance, climate, and of course, ecosystems. In ecology, this type of maths and concepts were starting to penetrate our theory when people start thinking about what is the meaning of stability in ecosystems and why they are so diverse. Back in early 60s and 70s, people like Richard Lewontin, MacArthur at Princeton, Holling at IASA were already bringing some of those models into ecological problems and realizing that ecosystems might also present that kind of multi-stability that other complex systems show. When I talk of resilience, I often thinking on resilience in ecosystems and then on the context of regime shifts. We define regime shifts as these large, abrupt, and persistent critical transitions in the function and structure of ecosystems. Iconic examples include that of forest to savannas. That picture is taken from El Chaco forest over areas of Latin America, where the forest is being converted to savanna due to cattle ranching and the development of some economic activities. The thing is, even if you remove the causa of the landscape, chances are that some feedbacks has been either put into place or weakened, making the forest hard to recover. Another canonical example is that of coral reefs, where these beautiful three-dimensional structures might be overgrown by macroalgae. And with them, you lose biodiversity and important services like tourism, fisheries, and coastal protection from erosion. And a last example would be something like fisheries collapse that can affect, the livelihood of over 50 million people around the world that depends on fisheries for living. This type of concepts have, as I say, arrived to ecology in the 60s and 70s, but before, ecologists used to believe that when you perturb an ecosystem, they will come back to some sort of climax of equilibrium. Some ecologists start challenging that idea in the 60s, introducing that idea of alternative stable states in systems like fisheries, outbreaks, and so forth. With them, they kind of planted the seed, and many ecologists over the decades have been gathering empirical support for that kind of dynamics. And with that, new research question has arrived, like how do we manage these regime shifts in ecosystems? Lately, in the last decade, people have started to think whether this type of dynamics might be interconnected and aggregate at large scales. Here is a kind of a cartoon that I usually use on teaching just to clarify some of the different types of changes that you might find in ecosystems. You might look or like empirically see this type of jumps in time series on ecosystem from one state to another, say the high density of trees versus low density of trees, just because there is a jump on the driver. But if you plot the ecosystem state against the driver, you will find that follow a semi-linear relationship. In other cases, you might hit some sweet spot that this works as a threshold that makes the system flip from one state to another. But if you are lucky enough, if you reduce your forcing, the ecosystem might recover. A more interesting case is that of hysteresis, but the threshold or the point of the first point that you need to reach to flip the system is not the same point that you need to reach to achieve recovery. So the branch of collapse is different from the branch of recovery, and that's what makes this phenomena difficult to reverse and sometimes costly in terms of management. Since the very beginning, people have approximated resilience or have proposed the size of the basin of attraction as a proxy of resilience, the depth, the slope, and the proximity to the boundary of the threshold where the system will flip from one basin to another. In this paper by William Clark is now professor at Harvard, but at the time was a postdoc working with Holly in INEAS in '75. They already started describing some equations to describe some of those dimensions of the state of the system. But some of the questions that remain unanswered is whether when you talk about resilience, whether it's a property of the system or the regime. In that case, a good proxy would be your state variables, whether it's a property of the disturbance, like frequency of fire, most lately, Carpenter and others have insisted that to the users of the concept to define before, using the word resilience, define what are the boundaries of your system, because as soon as you change the boundary conditions of your system, the meaning of that word might change. And more recently, people have been trying to get out of that theoretical framework and empirically trying to identify what are the good or enough observables that will inform you about some aspects of those basins of attraction. So before I close up this introductory part, I want to make sure that everyone has clear why this type of phenomena are important. First, ecosystems sometimes might follow this kind of semi-linear behavior, but that doesn't mean that the fact that in the past they have been following that type of trajectory doesn't mean that in the future, for example, with climate change, they might follow a more discontinuous type of behavior. This type of phenomena are important because they reduce the benefits people get from nature. They are difficult to anticipate and costly to reverse. It's difficult to perform experiments at the scale at which the feedbacks are operating. Because of that, they are often studied in isolation. So the experts of coral reefs talk to the coral reef experts, the experts of the forest take to forest experts, but they don't often cross-fertilize their fields of study. So motivated by that, during my PhD and my postdoc, I've been trying to solve problems like how do we compare regime shifts, given that they happen in very different time and spatial scales. To do that, we developed a database that is described on that paper reference there. By using the database, we managed to answer questions such as what are the main drivers of the regime shifts or impacts on ecosystem services and human well-being, and more recently on my postdoc, whether these phenomena can be interconnected. But one of the questions that remain elusive is where are regime shifts likely to happen? And that's what I will try to answer today. I hope that I will convince you that answering that question depends on our ability to measure resilience or measure changes on resilience in space. Of course, I'm not the first person trying to do that. In the past, people have been using critical slowing down as a proxy of resilience. On the left, I have a graph that summarizes the theory. When you have a resilient system, that basin of attraction tend to be large and depth. That means that when you disturb the system, it quickly recovers. That leaves a very low variability in your time series and not a very strong autocorrelation. But when you have a system with low resilience, the basin of attraction widens. And that means that any perturbance will leave a signature, a statistical signature on the time series with higher variance and higher autocorrelation. That's what people have been termed critical slowing down. Those are tools from mathematics and physics that ecologists have been incorporating on their toolbox, and they have been trying to apply that to a number of different systems, from experimental settings to remote sensing. Apart from that, it has been also suggested that the skewness and kurtosis are good proxies of resilience loss when the regime shift might be caused by the stochastic forcing. And that means that the system might be visiting the alternative base of attraction and coming back before reaching that tipping point. Besides those statistical techniques, there are also model-based indicators like diffusion jump models, time-varying autocorrelation models, threshold autocorrelation models, and potential analysis. And if you are lucky enough to have spatial data, then you can apply techniques like Fourier transform, power spectrums, on patch size distributions, like Max presented a couple of yesterday, I believe. One example of a successful application of this critical slowing down is this paper by Berbeset. They use a normalized different vegetation index and a vegetation optical depth, which are remote sensing type of data, to calculate slowness, so increases in variance and autocorrelation. They found, despite the limited spatial and temporal resolution of their dataset, that they could find places of the forest, of the rainforest in the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and Indonesia where resilience is low. And that confirmed, by doing that, they confirm a threshold that has been hypothesized that under that 1,500 millimeters of rain, you find this B stability between forest and savanna. While this is one of the successful examples, other scholars warn us that this type of critical slowing down signals might fail when the dynamics are strongly driven by a stochastic process or when the signals have too much noise. They also require quite a lot of data to be able to extract some meaningful signals out of it. There are still some challenges for applying it, especially when the process is driven stochastically. More recently, Titus and Watson addressed that problem by developing a different type of resilience indicators that they term critical speeding up. So on the cartoon on the left, you see the situation with a resilient system with a wide and depth basin of attraction. Critical slowing down works when that basin of attraction widens. But what they see is when the transition is driven by a stochastic process, the basin of attraction narrows up, and that's what makes decreased variance and autocorrelation. That they test that with models, and they see that that decrease in variance and autocorrelation occurring when the probability of escaping the original basin is being increased by some external forcing that is stochastic. To the best of my knowledge, those type of early warnings have not been tested on empirical data yet, and that's part of the toolkit that I will try to present today. The third type of indicator that I'm going to use today is the fractal dimension. It has been more applied to spatial data, but it also works on time series. on his book, Scale by Geoffrey West, he proposed that the fractal dimension is a good proxy of resilience because it captures changes on the adaptive capacity. He interprets that like having a high fractal dimension means that the system has a larger repertoire of behaviors to deal with different types of conditions, and a low adaptive capacity or fractal dimension, which means that you have less diversity of behaviors and you might fail under certain circumstances. That type of interpretation has been used in medicine. People analyzing electrocardiograms, for example, to test whether you have some cardiac problem or a high probability of a heart attack, for example. And there has been also used in financial markets to predict financial bubbles, and also in engineering to predict whether a rocket will explode or not. So the fractal dimension is a measure of cell similarity across space. Because of that, the number doesn't depend on the magnitude that you're measuring or the frequency at which you measure. With the previous measurements, like autocorrelation and variance, it changed a lot depending on how you process the data, how long your time series is, and that makes interpretation difficult. With the fractal dimension, since it's independent of a scale, it provides a clear interpretation. And it's a bounded number. So for a time series, it's a number between 1 and 2. For a landscape, it's a number between 2 and 3. Therefore, it makes interpretation a bit more suitable. So the type of data I'll be using today are data that comes from the European Space Agency and has been harmonized by the Earth System Data Lab, which is hosted at the Max Planck Institute of Biogeochemistry. They have been collected about 70 plus variables that reflect climate dynamics on the planet, and that's coming all from the European Space Agency, so it's all open access. But the harmonization, the nice thing with it is it puts everything on the same time and space resolution, allowing a kind of a tensor algebra that you will need to apply things like machine learning. The type of variables I'm interested in here is things that tell me something about changes in primary productivity in terrestrial and marine systems. For that, I'm using gross primary productivity, ecosystem respiration, and leaf area index for terrestrial ecosystems, and chlorophyll A for marine systems. For each of those data sets, I have weekly observations, quarter of degree spatial resolution. That means that for every time step, I have about 1 million pixels or 1 million time series with almost 2 decades of weekly observations. I imputed missing values with a mean seasonal cycle. After that, I did a Fourier transform to get rid of long-term variability, the annual cycle, and the early warning signals are only applied on the fast oscillations. Everything is normalized to zero mean and unit variance, and each time series is tested with a unit root test to make sure that they are stationary. For the few time series where that didn't happen, I apply a freeze difference to the whole data set to make sure that a few of the time series that were not passing the test passed that test. With that heavy data processing, what I'm trying to do is get rid of all the seasonal variability and get only the fast oscillations. If there is an increase on variance or autocorrelation, it's only because of the signal of the fast oscillations, not the seasonal cycles. So here is an example with 1 pixel at the earlier stages of the analysis. So I'm not using here the 2 decades of data, but only about a year or so, more than a year here. I have here each time step is a week, so I have about 125 or so observations. That means that I use another 125 rolling window to calculate that. And what I'm doing here is applying a segmented regression, as one of the speakers introduced it today. So it's a statistical technique that finds a point where the time series breaks. The first part of the time series can be fit with one linear regression, and the second part of the time series can be fit with a different linear regression. What it does is you can extract the slope of the first part of the linear regression. Because of the heavy processing, I expect that the slope to be very close to 0. And the second slope would indicate me whether there is an increase in some statistic or significant decrease with respect to that timeline. And then the breakpoint tells me when that change happened. The advantage with this test is it gives me a significant difference whether these two slopes are different, and then I don't have to visually plot every single time series on my data set. It gives me an automatic way to extract where the signal might be stronger. Here's an example with the real data. I have almost 2 decades here of data. The rolling window is about 10 years. And then as it goes, it will calculate the standard deviation, autocorrelation, lag 1, kurtosis, skewness, and the fractal dimension. The breakpoint here is the black dots. It is about the same for the first 4 measurements, and the fractal dimension gives an earlier signal with respect to the others. The other nice thing with the fractal dimension is it shows you when the signal starts, but also you can interpret this as a recovery. That's with 1 pixel. Let's see now how it looks for the rest of the planet. On the top, I have the gross primary productivity. On the bottom, terrestrial ecosystem respiration. The results are very similar, so let me assume first to the gross primary productivity. The red lines show the distribution for the planet. So here is the 50% quantile, so the mean, the median, sorry. Here is the 90% quantile for the planet. The first thing that we see is that the distribution for biomes like boreal forest and tundra are shifted to the right. They are showing stronger signals or stronger absolute differences on the standard deviation. In the following visualizations that will be maps, I will be only plotting the 90% quantile adjusted for each of the biomes. So I will be plotting these outliers for tundra with very high values on this delta of the difference of the standard deviation against, for example, these deltas for mangroves that are lower in terms of the absolute difference, but they're outliers for being a mangrove kind of thing. When we see that in terms of the proportion of area, we see that about 30% of the most biomes are presenting some sort of early warning. And when we see that in area, in terms of number of pixels, we see that the biome that dominates those signals are boreal forest, but also the tundra, some deserts, and the xerophytic ecosystems. The patterns hold when we use a different data set, terrestrial respiration. We see about the same proportions. We see the same patterns despite these different metrics. And we see again that the boreal forest and tundra are the biomes who are presenting stronger signals in terms of early warnings. Here are the maps. I will zoom in a second, but so you know, is the standard deviation, correlation lag 1, C and D are skewness and kurtosis, E is the fractal dimension, and F is a summary figure. If we zoom in, we see that in fact boreal forests and tundra are the places where signals are strong, but they don't necessarily agree, especially in between autocorrelation and skewness. Kurtosis and sorry, they don't agree between autocorrelation and standard deviation. Kurtosis and skewness surprisingly show very strong agreement in time and space. And the fractal dimension seems to be picking strongly ecosystems that are water limited. So it is strong in deserts and xerophytic systems, or in places where are limited by water availability because that water might be frozen. Here on the right, you see the summary figure where the yellower the color, the higher the number of early warnings that agree that a particular pixel is presenting some early warning. And the strongest signals, again, are in the Arctic terrestrial ecosystems. I won't present the maps for leaf area index, but I would just say that the proportion of ecosystems is slightly lower, but they're picking stronger signals for deserts and xeritic shrublands, as well as the boreal forest. So they to be picking up signals for water-limited ecosystems. Where the signal starts, we can also see how that aligns in time. For example, here for standard deviation, we see that the signals that occur in Australia, all of them appear before 2012, and things that appear here in Alaska, they are more or less synchronized in time after 2016. What it shows is hopefully the analysis is not an artifact of the datasets, of the different datasets that we're using. The fact that the signal clustering in space and time offers some sort of confidence that the signal is a real signal of something going on those places. For people who are interested on marine systems, here is the same figure as before, where A and B are the standard deviation, autocorrelation are lag 1, so typical critical slowing down variables. C and D are skewness and kurtosis, and E is the fractal dimension. The interesting finding with this plot is that all the 5 metrics agree strongly in terms of the geographic and temporal patterns, with big blurbs outside the Caribbean, some stuff here influenced by El Nino, down in Indonesia and the costa here of Australia. So in the summary figure, what you see is there is a lot of yellow and orange colors, meaning high agreement across signals. But what you can see here is the dataset I have access to doesn't have a good coverage of Arctic and Antarctic oceans, which according to theory is the places where food webs and primary productivity might be changing faster than the rest of the planet. So I'm blind on terms of those biomes. So what are the next steps? So far, the signals that I'm finding doesn't support strongly neither critical slowing down or critical speeding up per se. Those seems to be things that work well in models when the driving force is either a parameter value or some sort of stochasticity, but reality seems to be more messy, and we are finding signals that are all over the place that could be showing contradictory things like increasing variance and decreasing autocorrelation, or increasing kurtosis and decreasing skewness, for example. So here on the left, I have a little graph that shows that type of where is the agreement and disagreement. A critical slowing down and critical speeding up are these yellow and green colors on the bottom, and there is a very low proportion of pixels where you find that type of agreement. Then kurtosis and skewness agreement would be more those pixels where you see that's flickering, and that seems to be a larger part of the signal that we find across datasets. Then the dark, the purple one and the dark orange ones are those where we find ambiguous signals, when you find increasing one and decrease on the other, either standard deviation and autocorrelation, or skewness and kurtosis that you would expect that they will be moving in tandem. And here the other are for pixels where you find many of these cases together. So where you find 4 or 5 signals at the same time. The next part of the analysis is trying to understand what is driving those signals, whether we can find evidence on slow variables or measuring the variance of underlying variables as increasing stochasticity. Actually, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm using the Fourier transform for temperature and precipitation, and initial regressions show that increasing variance on precipitation on the long-term trend of precipitation is what explains most of the signals. Recovering as statistically significant values for increases in temperature, but the increases are very, very small. So I probably need to do some feature engineering there to recover a stronger signal. And before going into that type of statistical work, I just want to make sure that people is aware of the limitations of this approach. I won't be able to detect anything that doesn't impact primary productivity as being observed from a satellite. So if you're looking at regime shifts between boreal forests that are pyrophytic and not pyrophytic, then if it's between 2 different types of forests that produce about the same primary productivity, you won't be able to detect that. So it's not a prediction tool, it's hopefully a tool that allows us to understand where ecosystems are showing signals of resilience loss. I would like to finish up by outlining some of the research frontiers. In the past, people have been emphasizing that resilience is also affected by patterns of connections. Many of the talks early this week showed that in the context of pollinator networks, so mutualistic networks, food webs, and the type of ecological networks that ecologists are very well acquainted. But less study has been how different ecosystems might be interconnected. Some groups favor the idea that tipping points on the climate might amplify each other, as Max showed in his presentation, with this hypothesis of the hothouse Earth, meaning that many of these climatic tipping points might create domino effects and cross thresholds in terms of temperature, that once one tips, increase the probability of the tipping over. But I see this as interesting hypothesis that has not been actually tested. And I find it a little bit unsatisfactory because it doesn't take into account the role of the biosphere. It doesn't take into account how species are changing fire, nutrients, water cycling, and so forth. They are only focusing on climate-related variables, that in this case is temperature. So with Simon Levine and others, we try to address that limitation by studying structurally how different type of regime shifts might be interconnected. We use a qualitative approach based on causal networks, and we connected different types of regime shifts, in this case, 30 regime shifts by 30 regime shifts that give us about 900 different combinations of potential couplings. And we study structurally whether we can find a variable that connects one regime shift to another, or new feedbacks that will either amplify or dampen the effect of the regime shifts. What we found with this network type of algorithmic thinking is that almost half of all the couplings could present structural dependencies. So there is a causal way that connects two different regime shifts. Climate was, of course, an important variable on that exercise, represented by increases in temperature or precipitation or extreme events, but it's not the only one. Frequency of fires, transport of nutrients, reduction of evapotranspiration and precipitation elsewhere are common mechanisms that are connecting faraway ecosystems. The problem with that is it offers a map of the plausible connections, but it doesn't give us empirical evidence whether they are happening in real life or not. So I hope that the work that I've been doing trying to detect early warnings will help me understand where in the planet these ecosystems are showing signals and whether those signals can be causally detected in empirical data. So to conclude, I hope I have shown some evidence here that ecosystems around the world are showing symptoms of resilience loss. Depending on the data set you use, that's something up to 30% as proportion of area for all the biomes of planet Earth. Forest, forests, and tundra are the biomes that are showing particularly strong early warning signals, not only because they are shifted to the right, so they're showing stronger, higher numbers in terms of the statistics, but also in terms of the area that are showing the signals. On the maps that I showed you, remember, I only showed you the 90% percentile, which is an arbitrary choice. If I change that to a 75, those numbers will obviously increase. While resilience is an elusive concept, it can be approximated from data. I've shown you here 3 different techniques. One very common is critical slowing down, which works well when the basin of attraction is getting wider and less steep. I try out critical speeding up that is being proposed as a technique for stochastic forcing when the basin narrows. And I try out also the fractal dimension of time series. It's being used more on spatial data and other disciplines, but to the best of my knowledge was not used on that context for time series. And I think the research frontier still lingers on answering the question whether these ecosystems can be interconnected in faraway places. The answer the short answer is yes, not only through climate, but the empirical evidence of these teleconnections is still missing. So I hope this type of data set will allow us to test some of those theories later. With that, I would like to close and open the floor for some questions. Thanks a lot.
Okay, many thanks. Very interesting talk. Well, questions?
Yes, I do have one. Yeah,
Well,
Leo? Okay. Yeah, really, really interesting and amazing data collection and data processing, Juan. My question is, how are the details where the connections between the different biomes or the different big ecosystems are related? I don't know if you know that or if you have studied that, but how do you connect those, the whole world, no? in basically.
You mean the last part of the talk, the science paper on cascading effects?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't present the technical details of that because it's already published. But what we did is we built this regime shift database where we synthesize scientific literature of how regime shifts work. Out of that, out of the scientific narrative, we can extract either equations or causal graphs, which are equations without parameters of how the different processes are interrelated. So for each regime shift, we have a causal loop diagram or a little causal network that represent those processes. And then for each coupling between two different regime shifts, say, for example, forest to savanna and coral reefs, then we join those causal networks and see whether we can find any variable that is either a driver that might be driving the two systems. Say, for example, temperature, increasing temperature might be a common driver for those two. If there is a common driver, what you would expect is synchronization in time and space, so showing the two shifts at the same time, but not necessarily causal interdependence. Then we look also for causal pathways, so whether there are pathways from one regime shift to another, and then whether there are circular pathways or new feedbacks that arise when you merge the two networks that were not present on the networks independently. Typical circular feedbacks that we found between ecosystems are things that has to do with fire dynamics, and typically one causal pathways that connect to ecosystems and are things that are transported by water. For example, sedimentation might join dynamics upstream of a watershed and downstream on the ocean or the coast. So it's by qualitatively identifying those variables that are common to different regime shifts.
So Max, have a question.
Yeah, I think it was a very nice talk, Juan. Thank you very much for this entertaining half an hour, so to say. I was wondering, you know this Stefan and al. Paper about the Anthropocene and Earth moving into this deep hole of hothouse Earth?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, that is based on pure speculation and a little bit of negative thinking, maybe. How can we test that? I mean, do you have data that we could basically measure such global tipping points?
No, I don't think there are global tipping points in that sense. I think there might be local to regional tipping points that when they occur, they increase the probability of other tipping points occurring. I wouldn't say that the hothouse area is plausible or implausible. I think in terms scientifically, I'm more interested in what is going to happen before we reach that hothouse Earth. And then So I don't think we have the data to test that hypothesis. If there is, it would be models, but then the models often ignore the role of feedbacks, especially the feedbacks on the biosphere. So things that we don't really understand are how the species and species interactions are changing Earth stability. So I think that's why they on purpose focus on climate things, because climate models are better understood and they rely only on physics. They don't rely on evolution, they don't rely on migration, they don't rely on all the nuances that biology brings to the equation. So I wouldn't say it's implausible that could occur, but I don't think that's relevant in the time frame that we need to act now. I think society will be hit by other things like biodiversity loss or desertification way before it gets hit by the things like sea level rise or a new geological era. That can happen, but it will happen in thousands of years, while other ecological dynamics that are more relevant, local and regional might be happening, just around the corner.
Thanks, Juan. Thanks for this nice answers. Thank you.
I think that the focus on that climatic variables maybe it's interesting because you could also have the experience of other planets. What happened in Venus, on Mars, that they some way reconstruct the history of those other planets and what happened. Could be the hothouse phenomena happens. I don't remember if it was in Mars, but this is the most similar to an experiment that we can have for that, because there is one Earth, you say that, Max, so we can't. But in terms of climate, atmospheric variables, it could be an example of what happened. Looking at other things.
I'm interested in those connections, but in a shorter time scale and maybe more regional scale. If you think of the Amazon, for example, if it flips over, the Amazon produces a lot of the rain that falls in the Andes, and that's where most people live, and most food is produced in countries like mine, Colombia. So whatever the Brazilians do with the forest is going to affect the ability of Colombians to produce food. That might not have or might have a big impact on the earth system stability. But from the practical point of view, it has more immediate impacts on how people govern their ecosystems, on how people will produce food and their future scenarios. And those connections are important to understand, that are, all as relevant as climate, the transport of water, the transport of nutrients, or things like soil biodiversity that we don't understand as well as other systems. So I think those regional to local interactions that will be changing the map of how people govern their ecosystems or produce basic things that we get for granted are the interesting questions.
Yeah, I agree. Any other question? I have a doubt about how do you calculate fractal dimension in space? Because there are many ways to do that.
Max is the expert there. I'm not calculating fractal dimension in space.
You did not?
I'm doing it. No, I'm doing it in time. So the fractal dimension is, I'm using the same as the early warning. There is a rolling window. And then the method I'm using is the monogram. There is another package that does that. What it does, an illustration would be,
Yeah, I calculated the fractal dimension of forest using in space and other, but I didn't use the spatial fractal dimension as early warning. But I will reanalyze that data, I think, because I calculated other early warnings and the fractal dimension also, but not as an early warning. That would be interesting to see what. But I think that I've heard that you calculated spatial and temporal early warnings.
No, I did all on time, on the time series, and then with that identify the point at which the early warning starts, where the slope change, and those points are aligning also in space. So in space and time. So they create clusters in space, but in time they're changing also the same time, kind of thing. With it gives me the week with some errors that are very close. So that encouraged me to believe that it's not a weird pixel or some random thing on the data. It's many time series around the same place that are shifting at the same time.
So they are clusters of.
Yeah, if you're interested on the analysis in time and space at the same time, Schaeffer and one of his postdocs, Sebastian, I forgot his surname, they recently published something in climate dynamics using machine learning algorithms that use also a data cube in climate simulations to find the kind of the edge of the time series in space and time, or the piece of the data cube that is changing at the same, like in tandem in both dimensions, is time and space. That's a cool technique, but yeah, they have century of climate simulations at whatever resolution they have. You need a lot of data to do that.
Yeah, I used a very simple way to analyze at the same time space and time, because if you analyze patch dynamics, you are analyzing something that is in space, but if you analyze that in time, you have a kind of spatio-temporal analysis, and I like that because it's in simple, and it's taking into account both space, because patches grow and collapse in time, on time because you analyze different points, not only one snapshot. So it's what I did previously. But okay, is there any other question? Sense? Not any question. Merry Christmas.
Well, thanks all for your attention, and Leonardo for the invitation.
Yes, thank you very much. I was thinking that exactly something that you mentioned, that was this would be very interesting to do this, but with Antarctica, because it's the biggest continent and we don't have the data, or well, in your data set, it's not included because I don't know why. I guess that probably the remote sensors don't work very well there. But there are other data sets that could be used for Antarctica, at least. That would be an interesting exercise.
Absolutely.
Okay. So many thanks, Juan. And well, we are at the end of our workshop. I will wish to thank everyone who participates. For me, it was unexpected that all the people accepted to participate in this workshop. I don't expect that. So it was great, and I wish to thank to the collaborators in the organization, Tomás, Yara, are you there? Melissa.
I'm here.
Hey, Yara.
Hi.
They all collaborated strongly to make this. And okay, I think that you have to say Merry Christmas to all. Anything? Do you want to say anything, Tomás?
No, just maybe to show some faces, so you can. What is this? No. Present. This is. Yeah. Oops. Go. You see? No, you can't see anything, right?
Which one you want to present?
Okay, you can do it. The one that you do have it, actually. The one that I sent you.
Which one?
Both.
Well, okay. Both. Now, present. All my windows will be easier. So here are the organizing committee. Tomás, Yara, and Melissa. Melissa, are you there, Melissa?
I'm here.
Okay. So many thanks to all of you, because it was a great workshop. And the other was, this one is about the complex system groups of the Universidad Nacional de General Sarmiento, but these are all very old photos. So, yeah.
Just look at you and you can see that it's old.
No, I'm equal. I didn't change. So, well, you are not there anymore. And
Oh.
so there is a difference.
Thank you, guys. It was really nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Should we do a final picture or not for the social media, for those that
Yeah,
are...
sure.
Yeah, let's do a picture. Let's see. No, me salí con la cara fea.
Wait.
Ya, hice 2.
There you go. 3 now. Thank you. Great.
Okay, thank you very much to all. Well, all the talks are available in the YouTube channel since practically now. I will cut the last talk and everything will be available. In each day, there is a list of reproduction for each day, so you have to search for the list, for the reproduction list to access to all the talks for that day. And they are there already. So many thanks, and we'll see you next time, anytime.
Thanks all.
Gracias.
Bye.
Adiós.
Thank you very much. See you.
Thank you, gracias. Abrazos.
Wow. ¿Quién es el perro? Matías.
Estoy tratando de irme. Nos vimos.
Chao. Voy a cortar.